Shall we invite people to ask questions?
Yes, so, well, maybe we could start in the live audience. Has anyone got any questions for Ian before we go to the people online?
Ian, I noticed that you had a reference to a plug boundary in America, and that's one of the last of the slides. Was the DNA analysis done from that?
No, that was just that's excavations that University of Leicester have done actually, and it's again just dating the kind of it's building up that picture of the earliest Neolithic dates we have from northwest Scotland really. So it's again nothing seems to be going back beyond that 3,700, 3,800 mark. So that's what we're getting from the evidence on the ground. And when we look at that bigger picture of Northwest Europe and Britain, that is kind of what we would be expecting. So when we started digging Ellendonal, at that time, the prevailing wisdom was that the Neolithic probably starts about 4,000. So we were a little bit late to the party. But actually, it is beginning now to look as though Ellendonal is some kind of founder settlement structure. Not such.
Could I ask something? Do you have any personal theories about what you think might have been happening on the island?
Yes.
And what are they?
Completely. I think it is a place of. I think it was a place that was probably used relatively infrequently, maybe for special events that were happening once or twice a year, something like that, which were big events, important events for the community. And when we think about what these kinds of events might be, the kinds of things I suppose that come to mind would be either things involved with things like rites of passage, where perhaps age group meetings where people transition from childhood to adulthood. In many societies, that's something that involves special places away from the community where you go off, you're imparted with secret knowledge, and then you come back as an adult and a full member of the community. Something like that, maybe, or else a place where those who run that society, those who make the decisions in that society, go off and convene to make special decisions about things at certain times. I think it's something like that. It's something that's important, not open to everyone, and probably relatively infrequent. And the fact that it's this sort of liminal place that's above and below the water at certain times is probably part of its mystique and part of its importance. So it's sort of it's a place that's deliberately out of day-to-day life.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Just touching on the water levels, you mentioned that it's not known why they changed. Have you had any work at all done on it? I mean, could it be climate related? Is it intervention to dam the outfall or whatever?
We've done we've had quite a big program of environmental analysis, and we've worked from a core taken from the loch sediments themselves, and pollen analysis from that, and pollen analysis from the site. And what seems to happen is that at the start of the Neolithic period, so about 3,700, 3,800, intensive agriculture begins in the catchment of Loch Oliver, as we'd expect. Then very quickly we get the incursion of a huge amount of sediment into the loch, and almost certainly that's a response to over farming or stripping of turf, possibly from the catchment. We know that we're burning turf. I keep saying peat ash. Actually, it's really most of it is turf ash that we actually found. If I'm corrected by the people who've done the environmental analysis, they're burning turfs, so they're stripping turfs off land, and that must be creating lots more runoff of sediment into the loch. So you can see in the loch sediment itself that kind of build-up that's happening. What I don't understand is the constant fluctuation, because you might expect that it would simply rise, and then that's that. But it clearly doesn't, it goes up and down. And one of the big problems that we've got with the loch now is that the outflow has been messed around with so much over the last couple of 100 years. So parts of it have been blasted, parts of it have been dammed, there's a road that goes over it. It exits into the Valley Strand, which is now intertidal, but actually during the Iron Age, the Valley Strand would very likely not have been intertidal, it would very likely been dry. So actually, there are so many competing factors relating to the outflow of the loch that it's extremely difficult to reconstruct the hydrology of it in now, far less in prehistory with any sort of sensitivity. So yes, so basically, destructive farming practices by the very community who are using it probably played a big part in why it was such an unstable environment. So
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I've got a question here about your 22,000 pottery sheds
Yeah.
and your roughly 1,000 years of occupation.
yeah,
How are they distributed across that? Do they cluster?
they were pretty uniform within the sediment, as it were. So the more sediment you've got from a period, the more pottery you've got from a period. We had almost nothing that I would say was a deposit of pottery. It was just, it appeared to be randomly distributed throughout the deposits, with I think 2 exceptions, one of which I showed you that nice big chunk of fine pottery. So there's a sense that lots of pottery is being used all the time. Obviously, I think, let's, for the sake of argument, 2,000 pots over 1,000 years is only 2 pots a year. But actually, we've excavated only a relatively small part of the site. We know lots of it's underwater, and most of this pottery is probably chucked away when it breaks. So actually, an awful lot of pottery has been used and broken. If anything, it declines a little bit towards the later stages, but that may just be because the deposits are so fragmented and relatively thin in those periods. So it's kind of there all the time.
We've got 2 questions from Zoom. And the first is from Ian, who was asking how much tree cover was there in Uist at that period and what type of trees?
So the pollen analysis suggests that prior to the establishment of the Neolithic settlements of the region, there would have been a sort of light hazel and birch forest across the island, but with enough open ground that you would have a certain amount of open heatherland as well. And that matches, that's from the pollen evidence, and that matches quite nicely with the wood species and so on that we get from the site itself. We've also got we've got a couple of pieces of larch which must have been obtained as driftwood from the underwater deposits, but most of it is local woodland. That disappears really quickly from the catchment once farming is established, but it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be stands of woodland in other areas.
Thank you. There's a question from Annette as well, who says, is this site unique or are there others to cross-compare with?
It's unique in the sense that it's the only one which has had substantial modern excavation so far. But the work that Duncan Garland and Fraser Sturt are doing is confirming that actually, I think there are probably hundreds of these sites across the Western Isles, and by definition, they're going to be, for the most part, waterlogged. And so as an archaeological resource, it's almost incalculable. I think there's a huge amount out there. I don't think Ellendonal is unique. I think in other cases as well, sites like Ellendonal would have, in other circumstances, would have probably been built over in the Iron Age, because we have so many island broths, for example. And I'm sure a number of them will be on sites that were used in earlier periods. So I think that's the question, is by no means unique.
We have a comment and a question from Deborah, who says the end of its Neolithic use is about 2800 BC, the same time as major changes were occurring in Orkney. Is this coincidence?
No, I'm sure it's not. As I said, we now have several sites in the Western Isles where we have grooved ware, which is the characteristic late Neolithic pottery that we see in northwest Scotland, in fact all over Britain really. And the fact that not a single sherd of that is present at Ellendonal must really mean that Ellendonal cuts out at the period when grooved ware comes in. I suspect, it seems unlikely to me that that's coincidental. I mean, it may be that Ellendonal just becomes completely untenable because of the water levels and just is no longer a place that you can do whatever it is that they were doing there. But I think it seems a bit too much of a coincidence, really, that it's the period when all these changes are taking place in Orkney as well. So it's a period, we know it's a period of major social change. Yeah, that could very well be the reason for its abandonment.
Thank you. Cynthia is asking, did you find any human or animal remains at any level?
Yeah, so human bone really survives very, very poorly at Ellendonal. No human bone at all. Animal bone, very odd really, the survival of animal bone, because we would randomly find fragments of animal bone in different parts of the site. It wasn't as if there was some particular layers that preserved it better than others, but clearly it had well, one would imagine it had been present but disintegrated for most of the site, and just survived in locally, sort of local microenvironments, I guess. The animal bone assemblage, such as it is pretty undistinguished. Sheep and cattle are the dominant species. There's a few individual fragments of antler, some whale bone. Pretty much what you'd expect if you had a big assemblage would boil down into a fairly tiny assemblage.
Thank you. Fiona is asking the similarity of the pottery over such a long period, 1,000 years. Was this common elsewhere, for example, in Orkney?
No, not at all. I mean, in Orkney, you have groove coming in significantly earlier. I don't know enough about the detail of the early Neolithic pottery in Orkney, really, but my impression is that there's more of a change over time. Ellendonal is the only site, I think, certainly in the Western Isles, where we have a sequence of that length to be able to look at continuity versus change. But it seems in the great span of archaeology, it's not something I've come across anywhere else, that you have that level of conservatism for that length of time.
Thank you. And have you done any analysis of the contents of the vessels?
We haven't, but there has been some organic residue work done at University of Bristol. From my memory of the results, it's nothing particularly earth-shattering. I mean, a mixture of meat and vegetable remains from the pots. Nothing to suggest that specific pots were being used for specific things. But the work was quite preliminary, and in fact, it was done probably about 10 years ago. And organic residue research has moved on quite a lot in that time. So it's something that we would very much like to see more of being done on the assemblage. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody, any more questions from the audience here? I've got one, which was that you mentioned what was there later and how that possibly fitted with what was else going on in the landscape around there, which we're hoping to look at tomorrow. But could you talk a little bit about the existing stone causeway, which is quite a sort of substantial feature, the bits that are inland of that, and also I do remember, which is quite a major feature on the site, is this sort of jetty thing that sticks out at what, 11 o'clock or something.
That was us.
Oh, that was you. Oh, right.
In fact, almost everything you described was us. But we realised the causeway to in the slide that black and white slide I showed had the original causeway in it. It became obvious very quickly that it wasn't safe access to the site for excavation to have that original causeway. So what we did was the whole thing is planned stone by stone. It's about that long, a piece of perma trace. And then basically we enhanced it with stone that we were excavating from the end itself. So and the jetty thing that sticks out is was to give us clearance of the site for wet sitting. So we built that out and we did our wet sitting off the side of the island there. All the deposits were wet sift, which was a nightmare with this claggy ash that forms most of the island. But it was certainly worth it in terms of recovery of material. So yeah, the original causeway though is interesting. The part that runs up onto the land is completely original.
Right.
So it's only where it enters the water that we've resurfaced it. Be interested to see how much is still there actually in the bank. So it was very substantial, and it interestingly it runs way out of the loch, by about, well, from my memory, from probably about here to the wall, something like that. Yeah. So again, it relates to a period of quite high water level, presumably. Yeah. And we think, I mean, one of the things I'll talk about more on the walk is that the Ellen Oliver, which I mentioned briefly, which is now a promontory just along a little bit, a couple of hundred yards away along the loch side. It's an Iron Age site in its initial phases with a wall around it at a significantly higher level than Ellendonal itself. And if that wall was originally built at water level, that would pretty much submerge Ellendonal. We suspect that probably that was the case in the Iron Age, and that the reason for the survival of those superficial structures is because they were probably underwater for, I would imagine, pretty much from at least the Bronze Age until the blasting of the rock outlet, probably in the early 20th century. I think that's what's reduced the level of the rock laterally. It's hard to imagine any other context in which surface features from the Neolithic could survive into the present.
Thank you, Ian. I think Emily,
Yeah,
you
is that-
would like to round off proceedings
Yeah,
this evening.
Well, I'll just finish by saying thank you very much, Ian, for coming and speaking to us. It's just fantastic. Really nice for you to walk us through that real sense of deep time. I think that's really what stood out to me in those really complex sequences, and nice as well to hear the latest thinking, how your thinking's changed over time. I think that's really important in archaeology. So it's fab to hear that as well. So thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. I look forward to tomorrow as well.
Thank you